Animation is really hard. But if you practice the basics and you master the basics, you will become a better animator. So in this video, I'm going to break down the single best exercise you can do, which is the pendulum. If you combine this with a bouncing ball, you will become a better animator. Now there's two versions of this exercise. The first one is the pendulum flying around a screen and easing into stops and stopping slowly. And that is definitely a useful assignment. I think my version is slightly better for two reasons. Firstly, it's simple and quick, and you won't spend ages trying to polish this off. And we're trying to practice here. This will not go on a demo reel. The second thing is it also practices momentum, inertia, but also really works on impact frames. So you see here, for my main sort of route or box, I have this TX curve, which speeds up and speeds up and speeds up, and then at frame 30, hits the wall, stops, dead. And this really impacts the tail a lot. So we can really work on the wave action, the offset, and breaking in joints. So in the time lapse, I will go through everything. If you set your video to half speed, it should be real-time playback. If you like the video and subscribe, I'd be really grateful, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you. Okay, so here we are in Maya. Like I said, I have the root speeding up and then hitting the wall. The plugin I'm using is the Pose Ghoster. There's a video on my channel which explains this plugin and how I use it. But for this assignment, it's really useful. So I can check the spacing of the balls and just make sure everything is working smoothly. So the first thing to remember when doing the pendulum is that when you have a stationary start, things won't move together. Now this does depend on how fast the root or cog is moving, but even so, things won't move together. So I'm making sure that each ball is slightly delayed and stays in the original position than the one above it. So I'm always counter rotating and counter animating until it kind of feels nice. I do make some adjustments as I go along. But this is why the Pose Ghoster is really useful. So the first mistake I do see a lot with the pendulum is that when things peel off, it's impossible for the balls to move screen left. Now in this assignment, you can see that my route, my block, is starting from screen left and it moves and accelerates to screen right. Now the cog influences everything going on in this scene, which means if the cog doesn't move screen left, the balls, they can't move screen left. They must either move up or they can move screen right. So I'm making sure I'm going in and just making small adjustments to make sure they maintain the same position or they're slowly moving towards screen right. But when they get dragged up and then screen right. They don't start moving screen left. That would be a very different type of animation. That would imply this has, its own muscle connections or its own mind. But this is just inanimate movement. So I'm working down the chain. I'm really focusing on the top ball and the second ball. So again, counter animating, going back. And you can see I'm doing this frame by frame. This might also be the case with body mechanics or biped shots. Frame by frame, sometimes what you have to do. And then get a nice sort of arc. Now this shot is of course always increasing in speed, right? The root, until it impacts at frame 30, it's always increasing in speed. That means the drag for the balls will also always be increasing. and the spacing between each frame should be increasing, and we can really focus on the impact frame at frame 31. I am using Animbot here for the motion trails. Again, it's just the motion trails. Maya has a good motion trail, you can use that instead. So here we go, I'm checking I'm being quite picky because this is meant to be like a practice assignment, but you should still practice properly. And I want to get that nice curve as it peels off from the wall, or the invisible wall. Checking the top one again. This is all about spacing in this assignment. So nice ease out. We go down the chain, go down to the bottom. And then check the last one, the heaviest ball. Making sure the arc is nice. That's pretty good. It does take some sort of back and forth. But once I'm happy, I can then start moving on to the main drag shape. So yeah, frame 29 is when you want the drag to be extreme. It's the impact frame should be the most extreme. Another mistake I see is sometimes students, they make the balls follow through on the same frame as impact, which doesn't quite make sense because there should be a delay, an offset, right? So on the impact frame, it should maintain the same shape. Now I then focus on one ball at a time. So making sure that the follow through spacing is correct. And this is when you can be a bit more flexible with how many frames you wanted to do. I think I did 6 frames for the initial swing. So the impact swing, and then every swing afterwards I've done 10 frames. Now the really important thing to remember, which I see all the time in student work, is they have the swings increase in speed, so the timing is smaller. So like 10 frames to 9 frames, 8 frames. That is not how physics works. So make sure that the swing is always 10 frames for every joint, for every swing. So I'm just going in keying everything 10, so 85, 95, 105. And then I can then make the animation afterwards. The second thing to remember is, again, physics, is that on either side, the swing should be almost even. So for example, on frame 65 and 75, the swing amount should be the same distance, and then on 85 you can drop down to a smaller swing. So 2 sides should be the same and then drop down. It's just physics, that's how it works. I'm also using my eye for this, I'm eyeballing it. You could be really precise and go to the graph editor and input the values, but I'm just doing it by eye. But again, the really important thing is every swing is 10 frames. Even these tiny movements at the end, it's still 10 frames. You could do 14 frames, you can do 8 frames, you can do 20 frames. It just has to be the same. Making sure it's 0, and then I do the last bit, tiny bit. And that looks pretty good for the first one. The first one's the easiest, of course. Okay, so then I think I take off the hidden layer and I add in the second ball. Yeah, okay. Now this next ball is where I think other students make mistakes. And this is why I think this assignment is so useful, because it's talking about momentum. So of course, momentum is the speed which is carried over from something. So in this example, the root has stopped, right? If the third ball, or the ball at the bottom on screen now. If it was to carry on, letting Maya in between, there would be a massive pop. But you must counter animate and make sure the spacing is the same or less than the frame before the impact. So I'm using the ghost poser to check this. But if you have, let's say, frame 31 and then frame 32 has a bigger spacing than frame 30 and frame 31, that would make no sense, because that would mean the balls are speeding up, which is impossible. The balls are slowing down. So you got to go into the animation graph editor or even on your screen and counter animate and make sure the balls has the same or less spacing. And then of course you can then offset them. So this will be, I think, a 2 frame offset. I'm using 37, yeah. So the first frame, or the first ball, the extreme was 35. So I'm now trying, I think, 37. So a 2 frame offset. But also, like the first ball, the swing should be 10 frames. So you can see I've animated those, that spacing is now less, or it's decreasing, which makes sense. This is physically correct in the real world. Now I'm going to find the counter swing extreme. And then I can take my curve from the first ball. I can copy everything, Control C, and then again Control V. There we go. Now it might be too big, so I can select that curve again, and I can go to the graph editor, and I can do some maths. I think times equals 0.5, which makes it half as big. The swinging is now 50%. I think that looks okay. The spacing is correct. There's no big pops, and the animation feels smooth. Just checking. Okay, cool. I think now I move on to the next one, the big one. Yep, there we go. So again, I use my pose ghoster. You can see this big popping, normally with the biggest one the most. So I'm maintaining the spacing. I'm rotating it back to make sure the spacing is the same or less. It's very easy to make this too big, and you will notice the pop, and it'll feel like it's speeding up, which is of course impossible. So again, checking everything in the graph editor as well. And again, this is an offset, so there should be I think a 2 frame offset. So if let's say the first ball was 35, the second ball was 37, and then the next big ball should be 39 for the extreme up. I'm just checking that how far I go makes sense, because of course the other important thing to remember is this is a wave action movement, and wave action requires the S curve and the C curve. So I'm trying to make sure that I have the first C curve here, then it breaks and becomes an S curve, which I've got a very subtle one here. I could probably push it more, to be honest. Yeah, I go slightly more. And then back into the reverse C curve. So C curve, S curve, C curve, S curve, like that. Still checking the spacing. I want to get that S curve, I think. I do think if I was to do this again, I could probably find a bigger S curve. But that's why I do practice, right? I do these exercises, see how my work looks, and I review my own work. Again, I've copy and pasted the curve. I've put it by 2 frames extra, so now 39 is the start frame. And again, 10 frames for every swing. I'm trying to increase the spacing this time, make it bigger. Times equals 1.2. Yeah, it's bigger swing. Yep. And then even more, yeah, I really push it. Got a nice swing through. It's heavy. And the heavier something is, the more momentum it carries, right? So it will maintain the big spacing for longer. And then I think I animate the last tail. So again, I copy and paste the curve, onto this last controller, which is the rotation of the ball. 8, I think I do. Yeah, frame 41 now. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, I maintain the, again, 10 frames timing. And then look at that. Yeah, I mean, I think this is now done, really. Again, I could probably go in and polish some of those curves a bit more. But this is more about understanding momentum and timing. I do try offset, I think. Yeah, I push everything by 1 frame. So instead of having a 2 frame offset, I change to a 3 frame offset. So it's just a small change, which I think helps. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, I kind of called it a day. Yeah, and that's the assignment. So hopefully that's useful, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.